Have you ever walked into a house that should have felt like home, but instead, something felt missing? The walls are the same. The furniture sits exactly where it always has. The pictures on the shelves still hold frozen moments of laughter, love, and life. But something in the air feels different. It's colder, somehow quieter. Almost as if the house itself knows that something has changed. You settle into your favorite chair, expecting the usual warmth, the familiar rhythm of life. But then you notice the silence lingers longer than it used to. The conversations feel thinner, stretched over empty spaces that used to be filled with connection. You catch the way they glance at their watches, how their smiles flicker just a little too quickly, how their eyes don't quite meet yours the way they once did. And then, a realization creeps in, quiet but undeniable. I don't belong here anymore. It doesn't happen all at once. It starts with small things. The way they make decisions without asking your opinion. The way your stories, once met with laughter and interest, are now brushed aside with polite nods. The way your presence feels less like a comfort and more like an obligation. Then one day, the words are spoken out loud. Dad, we think it's time. At first, you resist. You tell them you're fine. You tell them this house, this place built with decades of love and memories, is where you belong. But they shake their heads, their voices gentle but firm. It's for your own good, so you pack. You walk through the rooms one last time, your fingertips brushing against old photographs, the wooden banister that once supported you as a child, then later as an aging man. Every object holds a memory, a piece of your life. But now they are just things, and as you step out the front door, suitcase in hand, it feels like you're not just leaving a house. You're leaving yourself behind. They tell you it will be better, safer, easier. But what they don't tell you is how it feels to wake up in a place that isn't yours. How it feels when the decisions are made for you. How it feels when the echoes of your own home, the sound of your footsteps on familiar floors, the smell of your morning coffee, the rhythm of your days begin to fade into nothing more than a distant memory. Before you make that choice, before you let go of the life you built, there's something you need to know. Because sometimes the places they tell you will keep you safe are the very places that take the most from you. Not every home is meant for you. If this message resonates with you, if you've ever questioned what truly makes a home, then stay with me. Because today, we're uncovering the painful truths about leaving home too soon and the choices that could change everything. If you find these insights valuable, I invite you to like this video and subscribe to Elderly Wisdom Story. Here, we share stories that matter, stories that help us navigate life's toughest transitions with wisdom, dignity, and hope. Your support helps ensure that these lessons reach more people who need to hear them. Now, let's begin. It starts subtly. A shift so small, so quiet that at first you don't even notice it. You walk into the house you once called home. Maybe it's your son's house, your daughter's, or a place where you were always welcome before. At first glance, nothing seems different. The same framed pictures on the walls, the same familiar scent in the air, the same laughter drifting from the other room. But then something tugs at you, something you can't quite name. Maybe it's the way they pause before answering the door. The way their smiles feel just a little too polite. The way they glance at the clock more often than before, as if measuring how long you've been there. You tell yourself it's nothing. Maybe they're just busy. Maybe it's just your imagination. But as time passes, the signs become harder to ignore. You notice that invitations become less frequent. Phone calls are shorter. Once they used to ask, "When are you coming over?" Now they say, "Oh, I didn't know you were stopping by." Once you could drop by unannounced, and they'd rush to make you coffee, pull up a chair, eager to sit and talk. Now there's a hesitation, a pause before they say, "Oh, of course, come in." And when you do, you feel it immediately, the way they keep glancing at their phone, how they seem to be waiting for something or someone else. At the dinner table, where your stories once filled the space with warmth and laughter, you start to notice something different. They talk around you instead of to you. Conversations flow effortlessly between them, but when you speak, there's a beat of silence, a moment where they seem to decide whether to engage or to simply nod and move on. And then, one evening, it happens. You're sitting there, in the home that once embraced you, surrounded by people who should feel like family, and you realize you feel like a guest. You reach for a serving spoon, and your daughter says, "Oh, Mom, let me do that for you." You go to clear your plate, and they wave you off. "Just sit, Dad, we've got it." At first, it feels like kindness. But then you notice how often it happens, how your hands are gently guided away from helping, how your presence is quietly managed rather than embraced. They say, relax, enjoy yourself. But you know the truth. You're not being included. You're being accommodated. You tell yourself it's nothing. You try harder, laugh at their jokes, ask about their lives, offer to help more. But the more you try, the more out of place you feel. Then, one day, you overhear something. Maybe it's an offhand comment, a whisper exchanged when they think you're out of earshot. Maybe it's as simple as a sigh when you mention stopping by. Or maybe, like me, it's something much harder to forget. I remember the moment exactly. I was sitting in the kitchen, drinking my coffee, when I heard my daughter-in-law say he just doesn't realize how much work it is having him here. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't even meant for me to hear. But it was honest. And it shattered something inside me, because I had spent my life giving my time, my energy, my love. I had been there through sleepless nights, through scraped knees and broken hearts. I had built a home where they always knew they belonged. And yet here I was, in what was supposed to be my home, realizing that my presence had become a burden. I sat there for a long time after she left the room, staring at the coffee in my hands, letting the truth settle in. I am no longer welcome here, and that's the hardest part, isn't it? Realizing that a home can change, not in bricks and walls, but in the way it makes you feel. So what do? At first, you try to fix it. You tell yourself that if you make yourself smaller, quieter, more helpful, maybe things will go back to the way they were. You tell yourself that if you just don't inconvenience them, they'll want you around again. But that's not how it works. Because a home should never be a place where you feel like you have to earn your welcome. A home is where love is given freely, not out of obligation. A home is where your presence is wanted, not just tolerated. A home is where you are embraced, not managed. And if being somewhere makes you feel invisible, unheard, or merely tolerated, then it's time to stop going. That's the hardest lesson to learn, that sometimes the places we pour our hearts into, the people we love most, may not always make space for us in the way we deserve. And so, before you keep knocking on a door that no longer opens fully for you, ask yourself this: am I here because I am wanted, or just because I refuse to let go? Because sometimes the hardest part isn't leaving. It's realizing you should have left long ago. But what if the problem isn't that you're not wanted? What if the problem is that you're only needed? That's a different kind of loneliness entirely. And it's one we need to talk about next. First, it feels good. You love being helpful. You love knowing you can make things easier for them. After all, isn't that what family is for? It starts with small things, a favor here, an errand there. Can you watch the kids for a few hours? Can you pick something up from the store? Can you help fix this? You say yes, of course. You say yes because it feels good to be needed. And for a while, you tell yourself this is enough. That being needed means you still matter. That the phone ringing, even if it's just to ask for help, is better than silence. That showing up, even if it's only when they need something, is better than not being called at all. But then one day you notice it. The pattern. They don't call just to check in. They don't invite you over just to spend time together. They don't ask how you're doing unless it's in passing. A quick formality before they get to the real reason for the call. And suddenly, the warmth you once felt starts to fade. You realize that your presence is welcomed only when it serves a purpose. That your time is valuable only when it benefits them. That you are not sought after for the joy of your company, but for the convenience of your help. And then, one evening, after spending the whole day making their lives easier, watching the kids, running errands, fixing something around the house, you finally sit down. You take a breath, thinking that now is the time when you get to be part of the conversation. When you get to feel like you belong. So you ask, how have you been? And the answer comes quick and dismissive. Busy. No pause. No follow-up question. No interest in your day, your thoughts, your heart. Because your purpose there was never to connect. It was to serve. And in that moment, you see it clearly. You are not a guest in their home. You are a resource. They don't mean to hurt you. They don't even realize what they're doing. Maybe, in their mind, it's a sign of trust, that they can rely on you, that you'll always be there to help. But here's the truth. Care without effort is just obligation. Attention without presence is just duty. And love, true love, is not transactional. But that's what it starts to feel like, doesn't it? Like you are nothing more than what you can give. Like your worth is measured by how much you can do for them. You sit there, nodding, pretending not to notice. But you do. You notice the way their eyes drift back to their phone while you're talking. You notice the way their conversations flow effortlessly when they're talking to someone else but feel clipped and efficient when they're directed at you. You notice the way your absence is never questioned but your presence is always expected. And that's when it sinks in. You are not here because you were loved. You are here because you are useful. And the worst part? You start convincing yourself that this is enough. That being needed is close enough to being wanted. That at least they still call. That at least they still need you for something. Because the alternative, being completely forgotten, feels unbearable. So you keep saying yes. You push down the quiet ache that tells you something is wrong. You tell yourself that maybe one day they'll call just to talk. Maybe one day they'll sit down next to you, not because they need something, but because they simply want to be near you. But that day never comes. Because they have learned that you will always be there, that your time is always available, that your love is given freely without expectation of anything in return. And the truth is, they don't mean to take you for granted. They don't even realize they're doing it. But that doesn't change the fact that they do. So what do? At first, you tell yourself to be patient, to wait, but patience has a cost. Because every time you say yes when you really want to say no, you teach them that your needs come second. Every time you drop everything for them while they can't even spare 5 minutes to ask about your day, you teach them that your presence is not something to cherish, it's something to use. And one day you wake up and realize you have built your entire existence around people who only see you when they need something. And the hardest part? You let it happen. Because saying yes was easier than setting boundaries. Because serving them felt safer than risking being forgotten. Because being needed, even if it wasn't the same as being valued, was better than being alone. But you are not just a pair of helping hands. You are not just a name on a call list for emergencies. You are a person. A whole, complex, valuable person. And if the only time they see you is when they need something, then you have to ask yourself, is this truly where I belong? Because here's the truth. Being needed is not the same as being loved. Being depended on is not the same as being cherished. And if you don't draw the line, no one else will do it for you. So you start small. The next time they call, you let it go to voicemail. The next time they ask for something, you pause before saying yes. The next time you visit, you leave before they get the chance to look at their watch. And slowly, you begin to reclaim something you didn't even realize you had lost. Your time, your worth, your self-respect. And then something strange happens. They notice. They call not because they need something, but because they realize they haven't heard from you in a while. They ask if you're okay because they're not used to you putting yourself first. They start to understand, maybe for the first time, that your presence was never something they were entitled to. Because real love is not about what you can do for someone. It's about who you are to them, even when you have nothing left to give. And if someone cannot see your worth beyond what you provide, then maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop showing up. But there's something even more painful than being needed but not valued. It's being present but no longer respected. And that is something we can't ignore. This one is the hardest, because sometimes the place that makes you feel the smallest isn't a stranger's house. It isn't a friend's. It isn't even the home where you're only needed but not valued. It's your own. It happens so gradually, so quietly, that at first you don't even realize it. You're still part of the family. You still sit at the dinner table, still show up for birthdays, still hear your name called when someone needs something. But one day, in the middle of a conversation, you notice something different. You're speaking, telling a story, sharing a thought, offering a piece of yourself the way you always have, and then you see it. The slight shift in body language, the glance at the phone, the whispered comment passed between two people as if you're not even there, the polite nods, the empty hums of acknowledgement that don't really invite you to continue. And then it happens. Maybe it's a sigh, maybe it's a forced smile, or maybe, like me, it's a sentence that cuts right through you. Mom, you wouldn't understand. Just like that, you go from being listened to being tolerated. At first, you tell yourself it's nothing. Maybe they're just distracted. Maybe you're reading too much into it. But then it happens again and again, until finally it sinks in. Your words are no longer valued. The same people who once hung onto your every story now dismiss them as outdated. The same children who once looked up to you now exchange glances when you speak, as if your thoughts belong to another time. You have not changed, but to them you have become irrelevant. Maybe you felt it too. Maybe you've sat in a room filled with people who share your blood, your name, your history, and yet somehow felt like a guest in your own life. Maybe you've started second-guessing whether to share your thoughts, not because you don't have something to say, but because you're tired of watching them brush you aside. And the worst part? You keep trying. You keep inserting yourself into conversations, hoping this time will be different. You keep laughing at jokes that weren't meant for you. You keep nodding along to discussions where your opinion was never invited. Because you tell yourself this is love, this is family. But love should never make you feel invisible. And yet here you are. Maybe it's in the way they correct you when you speak. Maybe it's the way they roll their eyes when you struggle with technology. Maybe it's the way they joke about your age, laughing at the very years that made you wise. You're just old-fashioned. You wouldn't get it. You worry too much. What they don't realize, what they don't want to realize, is that the very wisdom they dismiss is what once guided them through life. That the hands they now brush away are the same hands that held them steady when they took their first steps. That the voice they now silence is the same voice that soothed them through their childhood fears. That the advice they now ignore is the same advice that once shaped them into who they are today. But now they treat you as if you have nothing left to teach them. As if your years of experience, your lessons, your wisdom no longer matter. And that is a pain unlike any other, because it's one thing to be forgotten, it's another to be dismissed. So what do? At first, you stay silent. You tell yourself it's not worth the fight, that you'd rather keep the peace than speak up, that it's just how things are now, and you don't want to make a big deal out of it. But silence has a cost, because every time you let them interrupt you, you teach them that your words don't matter. Every time you laugh off their dismissive comments, you teach them that their disrespect is acceptable. Every time you allow yourself to be brushed aside, you teach them that you are not someone worth listening to. And before you know it, you start to believe it yourself. You stop offering your thoughts. You stop sharing your stories. You stop speaking because why waste your breath when no one is really listening? But here's what you must understand. Respect is not a privilege. It is not something you have to earn, especially not from the very people who once relied on you for everything. Respect is a necessity, a foundation, a line that should never be crossed. So what do you do when the people who should respect you the most no longer see you? You remind them. You remind them by speaking up, by refusing to shrink yourself into silence. You remind them by not laughing along when their jokes come at your expense. You remind them by holding your ground, by showing them that you still have a voice and that it deserves to be heard. And if they don't listen, then maybe, just maybe, it's time to stop listening to them. Because you are not an afterthought. You are not a relic of the past. You are not someone who has outlived their usefulness. You are still here. You are still wise, and you are still worthy of being heard. So the next time they sigh when you speak, the next time they brush you aside, the next time they act like your words don't matter, look them in the eyes and remind them, I am still here, and I am worth listening to. Because a home that does not respect you is not a home worth staying in. And if a home makes you feel unheard, unappreciated, and unimportant, then maybe, just maybe, it's time to spend your time somewhere else. You spend a lifetime building a home, not just with bricks and walls, but with love, sacrifice, and the small, quiet moments that shape a family. You pour yourself into it, your time, your energy, your wisdom, believing that in return, it will always be a place where you belong. But what happens when the very spaces you once called home no longer feel like home at all? Maybe you've already felt it, that quiet shift, that unspoken change. The way your presence is met with obligation rather than joy. The way conversations seem to move around you rather than include you. The way the laughter feels different, not because it isn't there, but because somehow it no longer belongs to you. And it hurts, because this isn't just about a house or a room or a chair at the dinner table. This is about the longing to be seen, to be heard, to be valued, not just for what you can do, but for who you are. It's about the pain of realizing that a place, a family, a life that once felt unshakable has changed in a way you never expected. But here's what you must remember. A home is not defined by the walls that surround you, nor by the people who have simply known you the longest. A home is where you are honored, where your voice matters, where your presence is not just acknowledged but cherished. And if you find yourself in a place where that no longer exists, you owe it to yourself to stop waiting for it to return. Because you deserve more than just a space to exist. You deserve a place where you are celebrated, where your stories are met with eager ears, where your wisdom is not discarded but embraced. You deserve connection, not out of duty, but out of love. So if the doors you keep knocking on refuse to open, maybe it's time to stop knocking. Maybe it's time to walk toward people who welcome you without hesitation. Maybe it's time to create a new kind of home, one built not from the past, but from the love, respect, and belonging you still deserve today. And if this message has resonated with you, if you've ever felt this quiet ache in your heart, then know that you are not alone. There are so many of us who have walked this road, searching for a place where we still matter. And together, we can remind each other that our worth does not fade just because the world around us changes. Because at the end of the day, life is not about clinging to places that no longer hold us. It's about having the courage to seek new spaces where we are truly valued. It's about understanding that respect is not something you beg for, it's something you walk toward. It's about realizing that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is step away from where you are no longer seen and step toward where you are truly loved. And if no one has told you this today, let me be the one to say it. Your life still has meaning. Your voice still matters. You are still worthy of deep, genuine love. If you found comfort in these words, I invite you to stay. To be part of this space where your voice is heard, where your experiences are valued, where you are never made to feel small. Like this video, share your story in the comments, and subscribe to Elderly Wisdom Story. Because here, your presence is not just welcomed, it is needed.